So Craig, let's talk
Yes.
about data protection law and
hmm
Bitcoin. And for that, we just will have a look into the GDPR a bit.
Hmm.
And we take the GDPR as an example for data protection law because
hmm
it's not internationally. There are different data protection laws all around the world. GDPR
hmm
applies in the European Union. We take that as an example. But first of all, Craig, like on a general basis, data protection laws and Bitcoin, is there like a problem or is it all fine?
It's not a problem for Bitcoin, but people will need to ensure how things are structured. So you can't just say sort of Bitcoin's okay and then walk away. It's the companies that build things on top of Bitcoin that this will really apply to. So wallet companies, companies creating access controls, companies publishing information, that sort of stuff. Now, if you self-publish and put something up yourself and go, look, I'll put this up on XYZ, and I'm uh, sort of the person putting it out there, and then you go, but I don't want it there now. Well, sorry, too bad. That's a different thing. So if you actually do these things yourself, you're under a different set of requirements to when you've trusted a third party to do it for you. So it really comes down to ensuring that you understand as a company where your rights are and what your obligations are, and also then as a consumer what you're doing. So if you personally do something stupid, are you doing it on a platform where you can control that? And for instance, if you have data that is encrypted but linked to a platform and you can remove the keys, that actually will allow you to effectively delete that data.
Okay. So you would say Bitcoin and data protection law is not a problem per se. It's rather about the Bitcoin services, maybe.
Correct. So depending on how people implement things, it can become a problem. It's not a problem for Bitcoin. It can be a problem for parties who use Bitcoin. It's the same as saying, as an internet provider, um, I can sit there and go, well, yeah, sorry, and people go, but Google haven't taken down this naughty blog post about me, and you go, but I'm your ISP. It's not my problem. Go talk to Google.
Well, they will take it down as soon as you notice them.
Exactly, but then you have to actually have a company to ask to take it down. So, I mean, who are you going to ask if a company goes bankrupt? That's always a problem as well. So, as I said, it's not the issue with Bitcoin, it's the issue with all of these other companies and things. So hopefully we
I'm
can get
going to,
understand their
yeah,
obligations.
okay, I'm going to screen share here for a second
Certainly.
and would like you to have a look at some of the definitions of the GDPR
Mm.
and somehow relate them to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Article 4, Section 1
Mm.
GDPR, personal data.
Mm-hmm.
I've got it here. And it basically says personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, the
Yes.
data subject.
Mm-hmm.
And well, if we try to relate that to Bitcoin, Craig, where is personal data on the blockchain? I mean, we have payment transactions, we have, yeah, go ahead.
You've got two different questions there and two different responses. So where is PII and GDPR on the blockchain? Well, that's not the same as how does it impact Bitcoin. So to look at that in two ways, it depends on the organization and the wallet and the provider and who is creating that information in the first place. Now, that's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the pipe, the plumbing, the underlying protocol that enables that. But for instance, under GDPR rules, you don't go out and go, you are accessing that web page using IPv4, therefore, the various different foundations associated, like Internet and things like this, with the Internet protocol are liable. They might be the methodology utilized, but they're not the final cause. They're not the ultimate party involved in doing this. Now, that's where I'm saying, if you do it yourself personally and you construct something and you send it out, then that's, you are, I mean, who are you going to sue? Yourself? On the other hand, if you go to a wallet and the wallet doesn't have controls, that could be an issue.
Right. So the payment transactions on the blockchain, they are pseudonymous at best.
Well, they should be if you use it correctly. Remember,
yeah,
I talk about not reusing keys, and you can have multiple keys, you can have multiple fan-in, fan-out type transactions, and you don't need to do this, I'm going to publish my address and everyone will know who I am bit. What you're meant to do, again, is actually have multiple addresses, not reuse them, etc. So if you get dust transactions where people try and track you, send them back. I mean, this is the silly bit. People sit there going, I don't know what to do. People will track me. Well, don't use it. So that's all a wallet function. Again, if someone sends me ½ cent so that they'll know where I live, well, if I send it back to them at their cost, the post office, so to speak, gets the money, and I've done my job. Return to sender. And wallets could do that, and then there's no tracing.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring out a comparison quickly. For example, I've uploaded a year and a bit ago a picture of myself and some voice files, but I've done it to the blockchain.
Yeah.
And that's my own liability, which I've done. And in comparison, Twitch, a friend, a member actually, had some personal details of hers posted by someone else on Twitch a while back. And so herself and myself, we got in touch with the Twitch people, and they removed linking in reference to that personal image. So on that, it was who had the liability and responsibility and did actually take action to remove that.
Yeah. And so that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So if you do this correctly, it shouldn't be an issue. It's the whole anti-responsibility move with we don't need to care about what no stinking government tells us. And I'll not even say anti-government, I'll say anti-responsibility. Because it goes much further than anti-government. It's, I don't owe my customers. I don't owe anyone. And that undermines the whole concept of being able to contract with people even. I mean, if you have no obligations, no responsibility, then what are you doing? You're just saying, give me money, I'll do what I want otherwise. You're extorting people. So.
And Craig, would you say that all transactions on Bitcoin are personal data? Because they might be pseudonymous, they're not anonymous. And if we look into the definition here, it says identifiable. That means
no, because no, because by definition, if you use it correctly, then it's not identifiable. So there's no means of definitively identifying someone. They can identify themselves to you, but that is distinct from you being able to prove that it's them.
Yeah. Right. To highlight on that point, something discussed a while back about at scale, it becomes even more so with people using, a few billion people making 10 transactions a day, which is at minimum, and it getting split to different addresses all the time, different recipient addresses all the time, which is the proper model, as Craig just pointed out.
So if I have hierarchical sort of key structures based on something like a HMAC, which is a keyed hash, I could give you information that allows you to validate that this is derived from a identifying key that I own. Now, that doesn't make it public, however. That allows you to have knowledge about me. Now, under GDPR, that would mean if you're in receipt of that, all you need to do is have a process to destroy the key. And once you've done that, you can no longer validate that it's me or prove that it's me. And it's not adequate to run around going, Craig sent me a transaction. Can you legally prove that? Can you demonstrate it? It becomes hearsay when you go, someone in our company did stuff with Craig. How do you prove that? Well, we deleted the key, but he did. So again, it's setting up structure.
Okay.
Now, just to interrupt again, what I would say is, in the white paper where I said identity is firewalled, I didn't mean identity is not part of Bitcoin.
Right.
But at that stage, it was put in the too hard basket because, well, it was a proof of concept. I wasn't going to try and solve every problem. And identity can be handled, but that's a much bigger issue. So you can set up web of trust. You can set up sort of locked key structures. You can set up PKI with hierarchies. You can do all sorts of things, but they're big business implementations that and commercial offerings that at the launch of Bitcoin I wasn't really getting into.
Okay. What about the processing part of Bitcoin according to GDPR? This is here in section 2. Processing means any operation or a set of operations which is performed on personal data or on sets of personal data, whether or not by automated means such as collection, recording, organization, and so on, use of personal data. So, Craig, who's actually processing what on the blockchain? Like, are the nodes the processors, or
well, if you're doing it correctly, nobody. It would be the wallets. So once again, if you're doing your keys correctly and if you structure your wallet correctly, which isn't really happening with a lot of modern wallets, but especially around the core sort of area in BTC and Ethereum and whatever else, where they're now going, this is my key, keep using it. I won't go into theirs, but where you have a properly structured wallet and it follows what I said Bitcoin was meant to be, then this is not an issue at all, because identity and personal information is firewalled. So the key structure, the hierarchy, the deterministic sort of hierarchy of what keys you own exist is no longer public information. So just because you and I have done an exchange, that information, like if you read the original how Bitcoin was structured, it should be IP to IP. We connect directly, and then we can exchange information off-chain. The maintenance of that information that is not stored on the blockchain can be used to extend and prove the existence of personal information and can link the transaction to personal information. But that personal information isn't stored publicly.
But it can be stored publicly if I want to. I mean, I can put my personal data in a transaction.
You can, but that's then your choice.
My problem then.
Yeah, I mean, if you publish your bank account details and password on your blog by accident, and someone breaks in, then the bank's not going to look at you terribly happily. They're probably going to blame you and say, we could give you your money back, but this is actually your fault. You're liable, at least in part. And if we can't get the money back from the bad guys, you're paying the difference.
So if we look at the processing part, we have like the Bitcoin apps. For example, let's talk about Twitch, because Joel has brought that up already. They kind of use the data that people willingly put on there. So they're actually processors according to GDPR. And I'm always wondering if all the Bitcoin companies or app developers actually know that they're processing personal data.
I hope so. I have tried to tell people that they can create systems that encrypt information, that they have ways of locking information, that they have all this stuff. So I have been talking about it. I don't know if
So,
what I say is always understood.
Yeah, you basically say use techniques to avoid this part here in the personal data definition, because that
not
would
avoid,
prevent much of a. Yeah.
I would say don't put it on chain. I mean, it's not so much avoid, but when you're doing all of this, make sure that what you have is not stuck on chain.
If a business does it correctly, they can use the PII and they can prove someone, or that person can prove going to the business they are someone, and it doesn't have all that public information which identifies them doesn't have to be on the blockchain. On the blockchain, all anyone else sees are raw long code transactions going back and forth. And no one knows who that is. And let's say if I was a police force, and I would have to go to that business as if, if I went to a bank normally trying to track money, and then I'd go to that business and say, who is this person making these transactions?
Yeah, you could do all that. So, yes.
Then what about the controller part? I'm going to read it out here. Controller means the natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body which, alone or jointly with others, determines the purpose and means of the processing of personal data. So I'm wondering, Craig, who's actually controlling in the GDPR sense when we look at Bitcoin? Like, are the
once
nodes,
again,
the
it
controllers?
comes down. No, it's not the control. It will be the operators of the wallets and other such things. So when you're using Twitch, for instance, you're not creating on the blockchain. The actual transaction gets structured in Twitch and sent that way. So they're the ones who are actually controlling access. So you're then using Bitcoin as a dissemination methodology, the same way as a Cisco router is sending packets, or BT over here in Britain is acting as an ISP, or America Online, if they still exist, etc. So
just to add to the structure bit, if say like Twitch was structuring their data so that someone's personal, if I registered with Twitch and then put in my personal data and that came out in say like the op return Joel Dalle, blah, 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 be bad structuring. So like as Craig is saying, as long as they structure it right, so it retains the person's privacy, the business is the controller.
Okay, great. So there is a principle in the GDPR. There are many, but we will only have a quick look at one, which is storage limitation. That's Article 5, Section 1, Paragraph E, GDPR. And we don't have to go into the details here, but I'm just wondering, Craig, if we put data on chain and personal data, whether willingly or not, maybe other people put it on the blockchain for us without our consent. Storage limitation in Bitcoin, is there anything you see as a problem, or?
Depends how much money you want to spend fighting it. If you're doing op return and things like that, they're prunable. There would be sort of methodologies to go out there and make arguments saying, we need all this removed. And you could have that done through legal processes. It would be long and messy, but it's doable. Conversely, if you are sitting there arguing something from the point of view of the blockchain, whatever else, it would be the same as sort of a third-party internet provider without liability or whatever else. It comes down to the application. So most people don't seem to realize, but there's already a whole lot of test law on these sort of areas. The US, every Fortune 500 company, because of Sarbanes-Oxley 404, 302, etc., must use for not just their accounting records, but things like Twitter records of executives, all that sort of stuff, worm storage, which is write once, read many. And that mirrors Bitcoin in a way. I mean, Bitcoin's just a worm storage system. It's a distributed worm storage system, but it's still a worm storage system. So we actually have implementations of systems that are stored in multiple locations and can't be deleted right now. And I will tell you, practically every Fortune 500 company on earth, if you took some of the rules, you'd say, but they're breaching them, they should go to jail, because very few companies exist without some child porn on them in their records, and they can't delete it because that would alter records. So it's always a balance about these things, but you basically want to make sure that you implement things so that you can't easily access that information, and then you're actually covered. So limiting and restricting access is going to be a big thing in the future. So platforms such as that are building on top of Bitcoin are going to have to implement methodologies to obscure data. Now, that will mean that they can actually either have prunable transactions, which is one thing, or they encrypt and obfuscate data that limits how you can access it. And after a period of time, they could have defined destruction of keys, for instance, or spent transactions or other such things that now remove that information from public view.
Which is something that's mentioned here, which permits identification of data, maybe?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great. So let's just have a quick look at the information and access to personal data, which is like, for example, Article 16 and 17 Gdpr.
Yep.
The right to rectification and right to erasure, also called right to be forgotten.
Yep.
I think you've just mentioned it already with pruning, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit. How do we get rid of data on the blockchain? Or correct data?
Well, it's not going to be the blockchain that's liable, because it's not where it gets sent. So who is sending and who is putting it there and whatever else. And there's going to be information that ends up never being forgotten. And that's going to be problematic in the future for a number of companies. So you have to put things in there so that you can actually lose keys or destroy keys or remove access rights, whether that's privately, publicly, or other such things. So if, for instance, you have a encryption key that must be put in and displayed, being able to remove that in the future and stop serving unencrypted data effectively removes that, because if you no longer have the decrypted data, then it's not being displayed.
Okay, so solution by techniques, essentially.
Correct, yeah.
And to update data, if people have old data and they want to contact a business and such, and the data's there, would they be able to update the data through the business?
Through the business? That's more complex than I could probably answer here. It's going to vary where you're from, what you're doing, what information's being stored, how you do it. All of that's going to be important.
Possible.
So Craig, you have like mentioned or pointed out that it's not much about how we look at data protection law, but rather how we, on a technical level, solve these things. And I'm wondering this, and this is where we slide into part 3 already. If we look at the right to rectification or right to be forgotten here, why do we even have these rights here? It's basically, I guess, because people do not actually own and control their personal data in the internet we're in right now. For example, on Twitter, you give away your personal data, and it's very hard to actually get Twitter to actually delete your data. Even if you delete your post, Twitter would have it in its archive, and you actually cannot even do anything. So I'm wondering, in an ideal Bitcoin world, will we even need these kind of regulations here? Because these regulations and rights are just made because we don't.
They will, because there will still be third parties. If someone creates a really good wallet that allows you to have your own control over access with keys, etc., then that's actually going to make everything a lot more secure and aligned. So if, for instance, Twitch had the ability for you to have a on-off button that removes your own key. So Twitch doesn't control your key. The decryption of all of this stuff by Twitch is now completed by something you control. And if you can now go in there and go, no, and turn everything off, that's solved.
So that would maybe mean we have a decreased importance of data regulation law in the future. Maybe in an ideal Bitcoin world, it would.
You're assuming that people and companies implement this correctly and don't try and well, cut corners.
Oh, okay. So Joe, I think that's the point where you will be taking over for a little bit.
A few questions I was going to ask on data breaches in Bitcoin. Talking about security, how does immutable data that cannot be erased be used to improve security in the terms of hackers and people trying to, and even employees who try and steal things and then delete?
Well, think about about evidence. You can't actually go in there and delete access logs if you structure them in such a way that there's a record. So if you say this is when my machine's been logged into and where the access came from, one of the first things hackers do is delete that information. They make sure that they cover up their trails, and if they can no longer cover up their trails, it makes it sort of next to impossible for them to get away forever. Even then, some of the other things they do would be using multiple hops. Now, life would become incredibly difficult as an analyst if you had to go through every hop people used, but it's not impossible. So if someone went through 15 hops to try and like compromise server to compromise server to compromise, etc., if all of the records are there and won't be deleted, and we have a system in the future where all of this logs immutably, then it's going to be a real nightmare having to go through this and go and get all the required legal documents and go, okay, Joe Blogg's machine was hacked at this date. It was hacked by this machine, and then go to the next level and get the next court order and get the next court order. But eventually you find a source. Eventually the source document. And people will probably be helpful when you go, your machine has hacked my machine. And they go, no, it wasn't. And you go, here's the evidence. I've got immutable proof that you did this. And then they will go, but my machine was hacked here. And it's just going to be a lot of work, but it will be possible. And if there's a big enough hack, people will find out the source.
I'm going to throw in as well that because it's going to be on a public database, that anyone from around the world, if the hack is big enough interest, a lot of people might just voluntarily go, I'm going to trace that. And it might be possible to offer bounties out or rewards out to
if
people.
You provide information that allows it to be tracked, and for instance, even if you've obscured some of the logs, but you have a methodology to say this is my machine and these are the keys, then that would provide what people need to de-obscure everything. It might be really difficult to go backwards, but once you know information and you can follow it through the chain, it becomes a lot simpler.
Okay, my next question, the e-signature laws.
Hmm.
They've been around for some decades, very
Mm.
broadly applicable. How can they relate to data breaches and security? I mean, you've kind of mostly just answered that one, but I wanted to extrapolate a bit more on that. Is that
Well,
go on, sorry.
it's more than that too. One of the other aspects is, for instance, DDoS and things like this mean knowing where a machine happens to be physically at any particular time. You need to be able to trace down the IP address and throw a whole lot of packets at it. Now, if you have widely distributed systems, rather than a web server, you could have lots of little servers that serve up components and then forward to other machines. Then mapping all that and attacking everything, that's more difficult. But if we can now make it even more difficult, so things like sensors and sort of machines that monitor conditions and whatever else, instead of having them there with www.attackme.com, you could actually just have the other aspect of that, watching. So I watch the blockchain. When I see an event happen on the blockchain, I respond. Now, that makes it really hard to attack because you've actually got to be able to write information to the blockchain with a key. So if you don't have that key, how do you actually send it out there? How do you even figure out what to attack? I mean, it's one thing you can go, but I can send a transaction to this address. But my trigger might be, if this address sends to that address, act.
So
So
like a warning system then.
yeah, exactly. And it could be distributed over many, many systems. So it doesn't matter that you take out 99% of it. You have to take out all 100 nodes that are distributed around the world. Go for it. A use for all those Raspberry Pis that people want to put out there.
Bot army, well, you kind of just answered this one. Bot armies and sock puppetry can be done at minimal costs for
Mm.
large entities or
Mm-hmm.
even states. They can be
Mm.
used for brute forcing, data breaching,
Mm-hmm.
and attacks. How does Bitcoin help solve the situation, which you kind of just
Oh,
answered?
yeah. Well, also the cost function. It's really cheap at the moment to send out 1 million spam emails. Although that's part of how they also track them. But on the converse, if I'm going to send out 1 million spam emails and I'm paying 1 cent each, then every time I do that little campaign, that's 10 grand gone.
Yeah. How does key pairing with logins on an immutable database help prevent fraud, hacks, theft, or similar?
So we can implement systems like Cerebos, Kerberos, and allow them to be linked to sort of distributed tokens that are recorded. So, for instance, on a Windows domain now, they have a broken version of Kerberos. Linux and Solaris and Unix have been using Kerberos for many years in federated identity type interactions and logins. So that token exchange, well, who said that token can't then be recorded on a blockchain?
So my thoughts is that just to like back up what you're saying is that with the cost, there's a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of things which help prevent things. The
Mm-hmm.
valuation cost of attacks, the emails,
Mm.
people won't be able
Mm.
to spam emails,
Yep.
tracking communication if people are using things like Baymail.
Mm.
And the spam emails can be tracked, and that's not going to last very long. And then there's the key pairing with the
Mm-hmm.
login.
Yep.
Which brings me to the next question. As you have
Mm-hmm.
identity is firewalled, but when integrated, how can Bitcoin help with identity fraud, similar related crimes?
Well, rather than just trusting people, we can actually create proper identity structures where people can control, where they can be monitored, where it can be linked and built up over time. So identity is more than having a piece of paper. That's what people don't sort of understand. It becomes a ongoing process. Who is Craig Wright? Well, he's this guy that has done this qualification, worked at this company, said these things on this site, told Peter to F off at this time, told this person to go screw himself, etc. It's all those aspects of your life. And if you can put together enough of that, that's your identity. And identity doesn't even need to mean my name. So, I mean, if you have a proper identity system, I should actually be able to remove GDPR, personal identifiable information, and other things from it. If I'm answering a question for a payment and it's on a medical forum and I'm proving that I am a specialist in geriatric medicine, not sure why I picked that particular one, maybe something I've been reading earlier today. But as an example, then I want to be able to demonstrate that I've got an MD from Johns Hopkins in the US, but I don't need to say who I am. I've got a current medical license, but not that this is my age, this is whatever. I mean, I want to be able to demonstrate the requirements and sign something as a set of of states describing me. I want to be able to say that I'm practicing and licensed in the UK, for instance, not that this is who I am. So all of those things will be possible as part of identity in the future.
That's going to be very useful for doctors and patients worldwide, being able to get assistance from doctors from anywhere. Okay, which brings me on to just to point out about how Bitcoin is not cryptocurrency. It's digital cash or electronic cash, stated. And as per the recent FCA ruling, which comes into force on the 6th of January 2021, I think it's the 6th or the 9th. There's cryptocurrencies all out there, and Bitcoin is not. Would you like to just quickly state why Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency?
So cryptocurrency is an attempt to make a currency system that is obscured or hidden. It involves cryptographic algorithms in the encryption or obfuscation of data. Now, Bitcoin does not obscure anything. So effectively, it's out there in clear text. The sort of aspects of encryption are confidentiality, integrity, availability in the security bit, but it's can the data be changed? Can it be sort of altered in any manner? Authenticity. It's can it be viewed? Encryption, etc. Like, is it obscured? Now, Bitcoin uses the equivalent of in IPv6 and IPsec and other protocols, you have an authentication header. IPsec has a clear text authentication header option. Now, this is considered non-obscured clear text data that is verified from a source. That's what Bitcoin does. So that's where people go wrong. That's not encrypted. It's not crypto. Now, alternatively, when you're trying something like the Lightning Network, the whole purpose of the Lightning Network is transaction goes in, transaction goes out, black box in the middle. That's obfuscation. You've obscured the details and knowledge of who's involved. It's really creating a large mixer. Basically, a bunch of companies who want to launder money use mom and pop the same way as in the old days, the mob would always own dry cleaners and penny arcades and video game places. Why? Because cash goes in and out, the same with casinos, and gets all mixed up. And if you have enough volume, well, everything looks legit. And how do you get your drug money into banks and be able to use it? Well, you mix it with real use. So you take in and deposit money from all of your companies that actually probably have no one use them, and you pay tax, and it gets overlooked at because your dry cleaner that has one customer a year and paying you a pound pays $3 million in tax, saying that it's profitable, and all these people are coming in when they don't exist. Why? Because, well, you're laundering of their basically a whole pile of drug money. So that's really what Lightning's about. Stuff happens,
So,
gets lost.
so Craig, Lightning is then a crypto cash, even if
Yes.
that's not a good thing. Yeah, okay. But
Yeah,
they are
so-
still not a cryptocurrency because currency is something else.
Yeah, so they're
cash.
a crypto asset.
Yeah.
They pretend to be a currency, and things like Tether and all these other things are pretending to be a currency. They're not really a currency still, though. eCash and other things were effectively a currency because they were really a marker for money in a bank. So eCash was really an exchange of money that you had in a real bank that was just obscured who can take the money out.
And I will add that some of these anarchist proponents, they might be just like, oh, we just want a little bit of drugs and whatnot. But that type of tool, that crypto type of tool, the hidden anonymizing stuff, it always attracts worse crimes, a lot worse crimes, and worse people who end up using those systems for doing really bad things.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so another cut here, Joel. And then if we have time left, I don't know,